I'm hoping that's okay with all of you. I think most of you have been in recorded events as well from here. And I don't know anything else about BAVAC. A lot of the people on here already know BAVAC. We have Paula Aragoni, who's our executive director, on the call, which we're excited to have her here. And our programs are broken up into sort of different departments. We've got youth programs, which includes how we're presenting this program today. We have a nationally recognized preservation program, which preserves videotape. We've done some big projects for our art galleries and Disney and individual artists to make sure that they can get their archival footage so that they can use those for films. We have an adult program that has certification programs as well, so people can learn editing skills and lighting and all of the different aspects of making media. We also have our SF Commons, which is the cable access network for San Francisco, which is really cool that we do that. And we have local programmers who develop programs and air those on our channels. And it's really sweet program that we're so happy that BAVAC is part of that. And oh, and we also do artistic development. We have a program called our Media Maker Fellows, which develops documentary filmmakers who receive resources and support and work in a cohort over the course of the year and get support to finish their documentary films, feature films. And we just recently started a program called the Serial Storytellers, and we have 2 tracks for that program. It's for 18 to 25-year-olds looking to work on series, both scripted series as well as docu-series. And so we're happy to see, I can see that there's a few of our folks in this room, so thank you for coming. I hope that it's gonna be helpful. And I'll let Ali say a little bit about Real Stories too.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ali. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the program manager at Real Stories. And Real Stories is a nonprofit organization that's based in the East Bay of Northern California. And for almost 10 years, we've been training, supporting, and mentoring our female and non-binary gender fluid filmmakers. And predominantly we work with our middle and high school youth, but over the last year, as the landscape has changed, we've been able to offer more online learning opportunities to a wider age range. But we still, at our heart and core, our mission is to really serve the underrepresented voices of those that are identifying as female and non-binary. So we've been able to work with hundreds of youth filmmakers and really started them on their filmmaking journey, since we target our most entry-level filmmakers. Right now, we are currently in our June summer camp, which is we do two-week filmmaking camps in June and July, which students can join locally or virtually. And the goal is within 10 days from start to finish, our filmmakers work together to create multiple different films. And it's a pretty remarkable feat. Most of our filmmakers come in with little to no filmmaking background, and then within 10 days have a completed film that we showcase at a film festival. So I'm happy to see at least 3 of our campers from this week's camp is on here right now. So that means that even though they were on Zoom with us starting at 9 a.m. and did not get off until 3, they're still feeling the filmmaking vibes and are back for more. So I'm happy to see you all here. And I'm going to pass it over to someone else.
Back to me. It's back to me.
I was going to say, yeah, back to Dawn.
That's all right. Yeah, I just wanted to say we want to thank the California Film Commission for making this possible. We're super happy to be able to do this, and Jerem Schwartz is on the call. We're really appreciative of you supporting us. We're super excited to have Matt Kessler speak with us today. He's a co-executive producer and a writer on Animal Kingdom, and I'm sure he also has other credits to his name. And we'll gonna let my friend Robert Scott do a more kind of formal introduction. Robert has been the person who brought this really awesome program to us for the month of June. We're meeting every Wednesday from 4 to 6 p.m. and learning a little bit more about the process of creating a series, from art direction to writing to performance, for all kinds of different aspects of series development and producing. So I'll turn it over to Robert, and he can introduce himself and then introduce Matt. And we're super happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Dawn. I'm very excited to be working with
the Bay Area Video Coalition, as I too got started in public access way back in the day. And after graduating college, I broke into the business through the assistant directors training program sponsored by the Producers and the Directors Guild of America, which passed the link on to Dawn. It's a program specifically designed to help minority and women break into the industry where they may not have the connections to do so otherwise. So it was very beneficial to me, putting me years ahead in my career, and I encourage anyone interested to explore that avenue. But to the point, it's my pleasure to introduce my hero, my idol, my superhero inspiration, a guy who surfs just about every day and works professionally in the industry, Matt Kester. Matt, all yours.
Oh, thank you so much. I do not deserve the hero worship, but I appreciate Robert. We've worked together for many years now, a few years on Animal Kingdom. He's just a great guy. And I appreciate you all having me here. I feel very grateful and honored to be able to talk to you. So thanks for having me. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I came into the business a little bit differently. I had a professional career prior to getting into TV and film production and writing. I have a PhD in history. I was a college professor for 11 years. I taught history here in Hawaii. My field of study is US history with an emphasis on Hawaii and race and religion in the American West. And let me get that. Sorry, you're gonna hear it beeping for a second. I apologize. It's my kids. I'm in my kid's room and like that's his watch, which decided to go off. I couldn't even find it if I tried probably, so we'll steal. And I did that for 10 years and I had written a book. I wrote, as a history professor, they make you write books and articles, and I had written like a single author monograph and a book. And I had a friend who was a TV writer, a childhood friend named Kyle Haramoto, and he was writing on Hawaii Five-0, which had just started out. It was like their first season, and he read my book and he said, "Wow, this is pretty good. Have you ever thought about writing or anything?" I said, "Not really." And he said, "You should try it." So what I did is I went kind of the self-taught. I read like 100 movie scripts. I like picked 100 and I read them all. And then I tried to write a movie and I wrote one. I don't think it was very good. It was like the first thing I wrote. And it was like a very famous historical incident that took place in Hawaii called the Massey Affair, which is kind of famous, especially in history of race in the United States. And, I wrote that, and then I thought, okay, I got that done. And then I thought maybe I'll try to write a TV pilot. So I read a bunch of TV pilots, like 50 or so, just to try to familiarize myself with the format of them, and then I wrote one, and then I ended up selling that one to Warner Brothers into development. They kind of shelved it and never made it, but I was able to get an agent, and through that I was able to work with Dan Lin, and who brought me onto a Warner Brothers show called Forever that went one season and then got canceled. And then I thought, well, that was the end of my adventure in Hollywood, back to the classroom. But then it turned into something else, and I came back on a show called Outsiders, and then ultimately ended up on Animal Kingdom, where I've been now this will be my 4th season on Animal Kingdom. And you kind of move up through the ranks in the Writers Guild to co-executive producer as your responsibilities increase on a show. Some of you will experience this, hopefully all you will. And that's where I'm at now. And I've just recently sold a pilot to HBO Max, which will go into production in Hawaii in October, with John Wells directing, and John is the creator and showrunner of Animal Kingdom and Shameless and ER and The West Wing. And he's quite an accomplished person who I've learned an incredible amount from, about the business and about filmmaking. And so that's what I'm working on now. So, there's lots of ways to kind of get in and do it. But I think, just familiarizing yourself with what you like. I mean, to read 100 scripts of something, you can't help but to just kind of absorb the sort of like cadence of scenes and how they're structured and all that kind of stuff. and you learn a lot. So I would always encourage anyone who wants to get into writing to read a lot. Like you always hear people and they're like, oh, I want to be a writer, I want to be a writer. And then they're like, I don't really like reading. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to work out for you at all. You really need to read, and you need to read stuff that you like. And you can like whatever you want, but you should read it and see how it's constructed, and pull it apart and see how you would build it and maybe even do it differently. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And I'll talk a little bit about, because my experience is coming up as a writer, which is a little bit different in television. And I'll talk specifically, and I hope this is okay, but I'm going to talk specifically about writing for television now, because that's my experience is mostly, I've never sold a movie or anything. Movies are a little bit different, but we're kind of living through like a golden age of television. There's a lot of great TV. You'll notice that movies are falling into one of two camps now. They're either like indie features that cost less than $10 million and are kind of these really cool indie movies that we all really love, or they're like Marvel movies that are like $250 million that like there's probably like 20 or 30 people who get to write those movies, and I'm not in that group. So I don't have much to say about it. I wish I could tell you more about it. It's a club that I'm not in. So as that space has kind of opened up, right, where you're seeing either really small indie movies or really huge big budget movies, it's allowed, together with, I think, the new technology of streaming, to open up a really cool space for good television and really good storytelling, serialized storytelling within that television medium. And I'm sure you all have shows that you really love, and that have come out in the last 10 years or something, that where you're like, wow, this is good writing, and it's good storytelling, and it's good acting, and it's great quality production design. And there's a lot of people who before maybe 15 years ago would have thought, I don't want to work in television, and now are kind of like, I think there's some really cool and interesting things happening there. A lot of freedom for people who have traditionally not had access to, the filmmaking medium, and a lot of opportunity for new voices to come out in the medium that I think is just fantastic. It's just, great and healthy for our society and our body politic. And if we think of it in that way, as like, television has always been like lowbrow art, right? Or considered that way, as kind of like the media of the masses. And I would like to think that's changing a little bit, in the sense that I don't know that I ever necessarily believe that was true. I don't know if I believe in the distinction between high and low art, but I do think that there's so many opportunities to tell poignant, powerful stories in the television medium, and that you will all be people who are doing that. So I will talk a little bit about coming up and how the process of kind of becoming a television writer, because there's a lot of ways to get into it. I will kind of skip over that and just go into kind of the ranks and the responsibilities of a television writer as you go on a television show. Does that sound okay to everybody? I'm not like boring you yet. We got 2 hours here, so this could get ugly, but I'll do my best. So when you start off on your first television show, many people I personally had never sat in a writer's room ever before in my life. I had never been in one. I had never been like a writer's assistant. And a lot of people will have been showrunner's assistants, which means that they sat on a lot of calls, or they sat in the writer's room, or they took notes in a writer's room, and they became very accustomed to the flow and the culture of a writer's room. And I only say the culture of a writer's room in the sense that it's just like pitching. You're pitching stories, right? Or you come in on the first day, if you're lucky enough to be, come onto a show in the first year of a show, and you're kind of like, okay, we made a pilot maybe, and now we got to do a season. Now we have to do like 10 episodes. We have to tell a story. And so you're there, for me, I was brand new in a writer's room, and some of the things that I think were helpful for me were just trying to, or at least I'm sorry, I'll phrase that differently. Some of the things that were challenging for me was kind of figuring out when and how you pitch a story, when or how you pitch a scene. Like, how do I involve myself in this process with a bunch of people who've done it a lot, right? Who are much more experienced at it than I am. And so I listened a lot. And you start off as what's called a staff writer. And that means you're just like, and then you kind of get dismissively called like a baby writer. Like, it's still okay to like call people that, a baby writer. Like, you get called, because you're just like brand new in the whole thing. And nobody really wants to hear what you necessarily like have to say. So you learn, I think, in that first year to realize that my pitches are probably not great. I hope I'm not doing it at a time that's like inappropriate. But the good question, I think, to ask oneself is, what value can I bring to the show? Right? If I, you know what I mean? What value can I bring to my showrunner, to the person who's the executive producer, whose task it is to produce quality scripts on time and execute the vision of the show for all the partners, the studio, the network, whatever kind of producing partners you have. I found out very quickly that what I was good at, like the one thing I was good at, because like I would pitch something and everybody would kind of like, you could like see their faces. They're like, dude, shut up. But because it wasn't very good. And I was like, okay, I'm not good at pitching. I'm going to listen to a bunch more pitches. I'm going to treat it like writing a screenplay. Like, I haven't heard 100 pitches yet, so I'll hear 100 pitches and see how they do it before I pitch again. And so, but what I actually was good at is you write these things called story pages. So what that is it's like a 1-page like little sales document that you give to the studio and the network, and you say, episode 3 is going to be about this. You know what I mean? And it's very like popcorny, and kind of like what you're trying to essentially do is make studio executives excited about the episode. So I was like, okay, that's short form. That's 1 page. Like, I found out that I was like pretty good at those. So I would write them, and my showrunner was like, oh, you do these pretty good. So I ended up writing most of them. You know what I mean? Because I think he was just like, all right, I'm paying this idiot, so he's good at this, so this is what I'll make him do. But in doing that, what it also taught me was to focus on, what is an episode of television about, right? Like, what's it about? Like, every episode is going to tell part of a story that you're trying to kind of arc over an entire season. What is this one episode about? What part of the story does this tell? What do I want my characters to achieve in this part of the story? How do they change from the beginning of the episode to the end? How does that set things up for what's coming next? How does it tie things up from what came before? All of those things are questions that you have to ask yourself as you begin to approach your own episode. So it's very helpful to learn all those things. So I guess if there's a lesson in there, it would be like, just figure out what you need to learn at each step. I mean, personally, I don't, I'm a co-executive producer. So all of a sudden you're like, oh, people look to you. They want you to answer the questions. You feel like, and I always approach it as like, there's always so much to learn. You know what I mean? Learning what other people's jobs are, just it's very difficult to say, oh, I've mastered the craft. I think very few people have, which means throughout every step of the process, you get to learn more and more about what it actually is to be a filmmaker. So keep that curiosity, and maybe never think that, oh, I figured it all out. You know what I mean? There's always going to be something that you can learn from it. So as I kind of kept going, I just went through a couple of shows, and then what happens in the WGA is you start off as a staff writer, and then you get bumped up to what's called a story editor, and then executive story editor. And then once you've done those 3 years and you know a little bit, and you've maybe like gone on to set, you know what I mean? And so you've taken a script through the idea to the outline, through the drafts of the script, then it gets handed off to a production crew. And your scripts, you write things, and you're just like, this is going to be so awesome. And then it gets to your production crew, and they're like, we can't do that. We can't do this. Like, we have to fit this into our 7-day schedule. It has to be on budget. And you make those changes. And so you begin to learn a little bit about how the writers of a show and the production crews of a show work together. And you learn a great deal of respect for your production crew, for the people who actually bring your vision to life. You know, you scribble things on a page, but it's going to be a whole bunch of people who work very long hours and who work very hard to bring your vision to life. So thinking of them, you know, and thinking of like, how, you know, how is this going to, you know what I mean, affect the jobs, and being of all these people on a production crew, and being interested in what they do, right? Becomes a really important part of your job. One of the great things about being a television writer versus being a features writer is you are involved and responsible for the production of your scripts, for making them actually come to life with a crew of people whose job it is to do that. When you write a feature, you turn in your draft and the studio pays you and says, goodbye. And that's it. You never go to set. You never do anything. You're just done. That's the way features work for writers. Where the television, you're very powerful, frankly, and very involved as a writer producer in the actual making of television episodes. And so it's pretty exciting. You know, you get to go through all that. And on John's shows, we do not go to set, but on many shows you do. So you'll be sitting there on a set as a writer, and you're going to get to see the stuff that you wrote actually like come to life. You'll get to see the scene shot. You'll get to see a director put their vision into it. You'll get to talk to all the heads of the departments who will have questions about what you intended, about what you want on the script. And it's a really great, very collaborative work environment with a really kind of amazing and creative groups of people who have very strong opinions about how things should look too. And you have to respect them and allow them their creative license and their creative freedom to help bring your script to life. So as you kind of get more experience doing that, you know, you kind of work your way up through the ranks of the Writers Guild, and being, you know, in more experience and more responsibility on television shows. And then you'll get to a place where somebody's going to ask you to create a television show. They're going to say, okay, cool. Like, you've done this long enough, or we think you maybe have a very interesting and unique voice. What ideas do you have? Or they'll say, hey, there's this great book that's out there, and we think that you're a perfect person to maybe adapt it and bring it to life. We have a piece of IP. So there's lots of different ways that like those projects can come together into a thing. And that's kind of the next step where you go and where I'll go. I'm going to stop right now real quick and ask if any of you have any questions before I move on to like the other part of it, which is like pitching and all that kind of stuff. Does anybody got any specific questions? Dawn?
I have a question. Yeah, I'm just loving listening to this. And last week we got the opportunity to meet Nina Ruscio, who does she's like doing the art direction and doing all that. Man, what an amazing team of people. Incredible. So I'm curious, like as a writer, I know she'll come to you to say, how do you envision it? But are you writing it thinking about, like, I think I loved what you just said about like having care and concern for the folks who are working long hours to like actually make this happen, you know, make what, you know, your episode happen or whatever. But are you also writing, thinking about like what the art direction team is going to be needing to do or put together? And how does that work for you?
I do. I think you should. So there's that's a great question. There's a really delicate balance between what you never want to do in your writing is like, because you don't want to totally limit yourself to be like, oh, I shouldn't write this because maybe it's not producible. You want to always start. And I think you always want to start with like, I'm just going to write what I think is cool and what I think is going to work. And then when we have to scale back, we scale back, right? So you start off and you think to yourself, like on a regular TV show, what you'll generally have, and this gets into like the budgeting and the practical parts of production, is if you're doing a TV show like Animal Kingdom, which you may have seen, Animal Kingdom is about a crime family in a Southern California community. And I classify it under, it's like surf noir, right? It's like this like kind of cool crime thing in the Southern California beach world. It's like a If you've ever read a Don Winslow novel, it's a very similar kind of thing, like a coastal noir, like a surf noir. It's a very kind of specific genre that has been around for, you know, a decently long time. I mean, you know what I mean? Raymond Chandler was writing these kind of like noirish things in LA, and like, you know, he went to the beach and everything. So it's a, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel with Animal Kingdom. It's just kind of a different twist on it because it's a, you know what I mean? It's a crime family led by this maternal figure and so on and so forth. And so what we built is we build out our sets, right? We have a house where our family lives. We have a bar that one of the brothers owns and operates. We have another house where another one of the brothers live, right? So these are our standing sets. We own these places. And then oftentimes you'll have what's called a swing set, which is basically like, okay, we have some space, some square footage on the stages at Warner Brothers where we can like build out something that we might need. Maybe we need it for an episode. Maybe we need it for a couple episodes. Or we may need to go out on location. You know what I mean? We need to go shoot in a diner somewhere. And we're going to find that. So you always try to achieve a balance between, you know, I try to set, I look at 22 pages out of a 50 to 52 page script. I'm like, I got to have 22 to 24 pages on our sets, ideally, because that allows us to schedule some days where everybody's just working at Warner Brothers. We own those sets, right? We, you know, everybody comes to work in the morning. Now, when you start asking people, we got to go out on location. Now we got to find locations. We got to move an entire company of people out to a location. It's different, right? So you want to balance it out between those two things. So thinking of production in that kind of like meta way of like, okay, cool, I'm going to try to set 20 pages on our sets. And if you end up with the first outline of your script and you're like, okay, cool, I only have 15 pages on our sets. Is there any of these scenes I can set at the bar? Can I put one of these scenes at the house? Will that make it okay? You know what I mean? You kind of think of it in that way. But you try not to think too much about production. Otherwise, it can be dangerous writing for production, right? It can come off flat. It can hamper your storytelling in ways that aren't always necessary. So I've always felt that it's better to like, have a vague idea of like, don't be totally disrespectful. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from a very angry assistant director to me. And because we were in Manhattan in January in Red Hook, Brooklyn at freaking 11 o'clock at night on the water, it was like 7 degrees and there's like a huge company out there. And they were just like, it was pretty miserable. You know what I mean? It was like really cold and nobody was happy. And we were shooting these scenes and there was snow and, you know, the AD was like, I wish you had some choice words for me, would consider every time you write out a slug line that says exterior night, what you are asking a production company to do. Right? What you are asking a team of professionals to do. You're asking them to stay late. You're asking them to work late. You're asking them to spend a lot of time away from their families. So does it have to be exterior night? Do you know what I mean? You know, just so you think you try to think of those kind. And you know what? Sometimes the answer is, yeah, man, it has to be exterior night. Like that's, yeah, like sometimes it sucks. But generally speaking, the answer is it rarely has to be exterior night if you know what I mean, if you really, really like think about it. So that's just like one example of like thinking a little bit about production and thinking about the people that you work with. When thinking of somebody like Nina, every time I think to myself, I'm going to set it at a diner, I realize that the locations manager has to find a diner that's somewhat suitable to what I want to happen in the scene. And then Nina is going to go out there and she's going to have to dress it up. You know what I mean? So if I set it on location in a flashback sequence in 1991, then Nina Ruscio has got to go out there and she's got to make this place look like it's 1991. That's a big job. You know what I mean? When she submits her budget, you know what I mean? She's, you know, that eats up a certain amount of her budget and everything else. And when you work with somebody like Nina Ruscio, who is a professional, who is an artist. I mean, she is an artist. She's very, very good at her job. You don't ask somebody like that, oh, just like kind of half-assed. Like that's just not in there. Like, you know, she doesn't have her job because she has that brain of like, oh, just make it look kind of good. So you're asking, you know what I mean? You're working with a community of artistic professionals and you expect them to like bring their A game to the whole thing, just like you are. And so you do want to think a little bit about like, okay, like what is that person going to, how are they going to read this scene, right? After 4 years of working with Nina, I'm decent at like anticipating the questions that I'm going to get from her. Like, hey, Matt, what did you mean when you, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I do that? And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll script into my, like, not, you know, you get slug line and you have your action where you describe what's going to happen in the scene, and you get into your dialogue where people actually talk or the action happens. And I'll put little things in there that I you know what I mean? I don't write, this is for you, Nina, obviously, but that is definitely for Nina, or our props, or our prop masters, or some of the other folks who I know are working on. So you do want to consider production. You definitely don't want them to get a script and be mad at you. But you also have to realize that sometimes in order to tell the story, certain things need to happen, and that's okay. And you know, as long as you're not being like, you know, no, I don't think any crew ever wants to think like, you know, this person is being disrespectful with our time and our talents. You know what I mean? You don't disrespect your professional partners. It's, you know what I mean? It's just as a general rule, like you shouldn't disrespect any other human being, but with your professional partners, like you're a team that's going to like make this thing happen. And so you need to consider them. At the same time, like you got to tell a story, and you got to tell a visual story, and it's just got to look cool on TV, and it's got to be poignant, and it's got to have all the things that make you want to watch the show. So striking that balance is something that you learn kind of as you move through the process and as you gain experience working on stuff like that. But I hope that answered your question, Don. Any other kind of questions before I kind of move into other stuff? There's lots of stuff you can talk about on production and everything else, but and you can ask me whatever questions you have at the end too. So I'll keep going if you want me to. Now for the process,
I think,
go ahead, please.
Sorry, Matt.
Not at all.
I think Chloe had a question.
Yeah, go for
Sorry
it.
to interrupt you.
Not at all.
No, thank you. Yeah, I just had a quick question, Matt, about like, because you mentioned about going on set as a writer and like seeing the scenes. Has there ever been moments, whether you've experienced it or seen like other writers, like where like a scene like didn't work and you have to like switch it right on the dot or like rewrite or anything? Or is it pretty much like locked in, this is the scene, like the writers aren't really like changing anything? Like
that does happen. Things will change. You know what I mean? Things will change. And a lot of times what'll happen when that happens is it very rarely happens like in the moment. Like by the time you've got to set for that day, what you're hoping is that, you know, usually what'll happen is the changes will need to be made based upon, oh, I lost a location. We lost that location. Maybe that happens the day before. That's bad. You don't want that to happen. But if it does happen, you need to fix it as a writer. So we have something to do. You may have an actor who like bumps on it and is just like, yeah, I don't want to say that, or I wouldn't want to say that. And you have to have that conversation. That's never a fun conversation to have. You know what I mean? But you sometimes have to have those conversations. So you do, usually the reason a writer is on set, and when you're on set as a writer, you're on set as a writer producer. And so what you're trying to do is your responsibility is to make sure that the stuff that they're shooting on that day is fulfilling the intent of the script and the showrunner's vision, right, of the show. You're there to protect the script. That is literally your job, is to protect the script, because what you don't want to happen is have some writer just be like, yeah, I'm not going to say it. You know, you have to say like, look, man, the studios approved it, the networks approved it, we did a table read, you didn't flag it on that day. Like, we're here to shoot the scene today. All these people are standing around looking at you and me talk like a bunch of idiots. We have to shoot the scene. You know what I mean? And so you know, there's a certain amount of leeway. I mean, like sometimes actors will have notes where they're just like, it sounds weird if I say it this way. Can I say it this way? No, you can say, no, absolutely not. I wrote this and you say exactly. That's not very cool. Like, actors are also artistic professionals. You know what I mean? And by the way, like, they have to put their face on the TV and say it. You don't have to do that. You know what I mean? So trying to think a little bit about like what they have to do, and that, you know, actors, I find, you know, there's always like writers like the fun thing that writers love to do is talk about how dumb actors are. Oh, actors, they're stupid. They're blah, 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 blah. Just say the words, me puppet, blah, blah. That's not true. Most of these actors are professionals. They inhabit their characters. They feel deeply about what my character would do. You know what I mean? If they're putting in a good performance, it's because they've thought deeply about it, generally speaking. And they have something to say about it, and you should listen to them. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean you have to do what they say, but you should listen to them. And you should, come to a meeting of the minds of the sorts and say, how do we get what we need to get out of this scene? Because they'll say, I don't want to say that. And you're like, well, you kind of have to say something like that because, remember, they're shooting scenes out of order. You know what I mean? They may not have you have table reads, so you're trying to make sure that they've read through the script and understand, but maybe they kind of read it or they went through the table read, they're busy people, and all of a sudden they're shooting the last scene of the episode on the first day of shooting. And they're like, why am I doing this? And you got to be able to say well, here's why you're doing this, because your character is going from here. You need to know your script. You know what I mean? I know the arc of the character. I know how it fits in the series. I know all this kind of stuff. So you can, and if you can answer their questions competently without being, patronizing or disrespectful or any kind of thing like that, I've found personally that actors are very responsive. They want you to know the answer. They want to know that you thought about it. You know what I mean? And they want to know that you respect them as an artistic professional, and that that you've thought about it, and you owe that to them, because their face is up there saying the words that you wrote. You know what I mean? If it sounds stupid or if they don't feel it, it probably won't be very good. So taking their notes is definitely part of it. But other than that, by the time you get to set in the morning on the day that you're going to shoot a bunch of stuff, if you're working with, a great crew, which we have on Animal Kingdom, a really great crew, uncommonly good, then you know what you're going to do for that day. You know what I mean? Everybody's pretty much got it locked up pretty good. But yeah, there's always the reason you're there is to protect the script, to answer people's questions, and to make sure that the shots that you're getting that are going into the can on the end of the day are going to be able to be used in the final cut of the episode. If there's a particularly emotional moment that you need from a scene, and you get to the filming of it and you feel I don't think we got it. I'm thinking back to all these takes and I'm like, I don't think we got the performance, or whether there was something in the shot that is going to fall on the editing room floor and we're going to be screwed because we didn't get the emotional moment. It's your job as a producer, as a writer producer, to talk to the director who owns the set. It's their set. You don't ever talk directly to the actors. Those are their actors. You kind of whisper in the director's ear and go, hey man, I don't think we can move on yet. I think we need to get this. You know what I mean? And sometimes those can be uncomfortable conversations because that costs money. You know what I mean? You have to, anytime, any minute you go over your time costs everybody a bunch of money. And so managing that becomes that's the part of this job that I had no idea is managing people and managing, you are a manager in a lot of ways. There's that aspect of it. And having kind of conversations and triangulating between, personalities and so on and so forth, that becomes a very important part of the job. I hope that answers your question, Chloe. I thought I saw another question in the chat.
Yeah, there's one more in the chat. How do you balance character development and managing the arc of the whole season?
That's a really good question from Paula. So one thing that is helpful when you're starting off a series, or maybe you join for this season, is having a very clear and a good showrunner or a good executive producer will be able to clearly articulate what is the arc of a character over a season? What is the arc of a character over a series? Generally speaking, when you sell something, the studio and the network want to know, how does it end? Right? How does this end? What's the final, you don't have to be able to describe the final image of the series to them, but you ought to know that what you want to happen, right? It's very difficult to write when you're just kind of I don't know. You know what I mean? Whatever happens next, happens next. Probably not great storytelling. But if you have an idea of where you want to go, you then can kind of parse out you know, what happens over the series, and you just kind of move backwards from there in like smaller chunks. Okay, cool. Here's where we want this person to go over the series. Here's where we want them to go over this season. And then here's where they need to go on a step to that journey in this episode. And even smaller, here's what we need them to accomplish in this scene. So you can think of character development in terms of an entire arc of a series, or in terms of an arc of a season, an episode, and even a scene, right? A good scene needs specific things, right? A scene needs conflict, right? A scene has to have something. There's a really great quote that I've always remembered by a very famous director named Mike Nichols. And Mike Nichols said, and I don't even know that this is true, but it's very helpful when you're writing a scene, is he said, every scene you write is either a seduction, a negotiation, or a fight. Every scene. It's one of those three things. It's either a seduction, a negotiation, or a fight. Now, obviously, a seduction doesn't have to be a sexual seduction. It could be me trying to, you know what I mean, to bring you over into my way of thinking about something. I'm essentially seducing you, right? Or it's a negotiation in the sense that I want something from you. You don't want to give it to me. So I'm going to try to negotiate with you to get the thing that I want. It can be a fight, not in the sense that it's a physical altercation, but it's an argument. But if you think of every scene in terms of a seduction, a negotiation, or a fight, your characters will, whoever is in that scene, they'll have to want something, right? They'll each have to want something. They'll each have to have a perspective. They'll each have to get something out of it. And it'll be very helpful for you to write a scene with a little bit of life in it that's not flat, because then your characters, like, they'll want something. Now that can kind of be applied to, you can think in terms of like characters, like what do they want? You know, actors are always going to be concerned with like what, you know, it's like the cliche phrase, like, what's my motivation? It's actually a pretty good question. Like, what do I want out of this scene? Like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Why am I here? Why are you showing this scene, right? Why are you showing me doing this thing or asking about this thing? You know, it's a pretty decent question. And so when you're thinking about character development, you should always start off a series. When it's time for you to do your own series, start off your series with kind of like, what is this character now and where do I want them to end up? And then you slowly roll that out over however long that you're, you know, kind of willing to do your, even in the most like, you know what I mean? Even in the most like procedural case of the week sorts of shows, there's always a mythology that involves the main characters, right? It's like, I'm a cop and I'm an investigator on the CSI crime unit, but really what I want is to find out who my son's murderer is, right? And that's going to be like the series mythology that, like, you know what I mean? As I solve this case of the week, I'm still got this overarching thing that I want to achieve. Otherwise, there's very little, you know, forward momentum in your storytelling. When you're doing a show that's not so much procedural, but it's serialized, right? Then you may be looking at other kinds of motivations, and every episode is going to bring your character closer, right? You're always thinking in terms of like rising and falling action, right? You almost got something and then you didn't get it. You know what I mean? And then you got so much closer, but then you didn't get it. And you found a piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't what you thought it was. You know what I mean? And you're always kind of like following that rising and falling action to keep your audience engaged, to keep your character lively, and to keep all those things happening. So, so character development is something that kind of unfolds over the course of the episode, the season, and the series. And the difficult part of the job is, right, is like holding that in that kind of productive tension and keeping the audience engaged. Does that help? I don't know if that worked for you, but cool. Anything else? I will move on then to talking about pitching a show, because it kind of ties in, I think, with a lot of kind of what I've been talking about. So if you have an idea for a show, you kind of come up with like log lines, right? You guys are all familiar with those. And it's just basically a one-liner. And you know, if you're in like the business world or like the sales world, it's your elevator pitch. It's like, I'm stuck in the elevator with the executive. And it's like, you got 30 seconds. Like, what's your great idea, kid? And you're like, well, it's this. And you pitch out kind of whatever it is, whatever your log line is, where you're just kind of like, you know what I mean? I don't know. I can't think of a good one right now. But when it's time to think of ideas, you'll be able, you know, you kind of pitch out your log lines, and it's just like, this unique character faces this unique challenge on their way to solving this problem. Essentially, right? It's like what you want it to be, where it's just something like that. And then you start kind of like fleshing out your world a little bit, because you can have an idea, and here's what's going to happen to you guys over the course of your career. You'll become writers, and you'll write and produce and do kind of stuff like this. And you'll realize everybody will be like, I'm so glad I met you. You're a writer. That's fantastic. I'm full of ideas. I got a million ideas for you. Here's the idea. Now you write it. And you're like, and therein lies the difficult part. Like, everybody's got like a bunch of ideas. Like, how do you actually like write it and turn it into a thing? Because what you are essentially doing is you have to create a world, you have to create the characters, they have to feel and be like real people to you, with like real people problems or whatever. Like even in the most like Marvel, even superheroes have problems like, and things that they want and need and can't get. Otherwise, it's not very interesting. So, you have to flesh all that stuff out. So when you go in and you get the meeting to pitch something, you usually go in and you get about 15 minutes to tell people what the show that you want to create is all about. And you go in there and you start with kind of generally what I'll do is I'll just start and I'll say, let me describe a world to you. Let me describe something to you. And what if this happened? You know what I mean? What if, I'm doing a show right now that is, it's about something that's like it's about my home. It's about Hawaii, which is where I grew up, on the North Shore of Oahu, or like right close to the North Shore of Oahu. And it's about junior lifeguards on the North Shore, which is a really interesting kind of world. All my kids have gone through the junior lifeguard program. It's very much like, and it was the easiest way for me to describe it to people. Even when I went in and pitched it, was like, hey, it's like Friday Night Lights, successful show. But instead of football in a small West Texas town, it's junior lifeguards and surfing on the North Shore of Oahu, like a small Hawaiian community. And immediately people are like, oh, that's true. Oh, that's cool. Here's some of the characters, right? Here's what's unique and interesting about this world and why I think you'll like it. And you're essentially like painting a verbal picture. And you can use, I always use visual, like I'll put together like a keynote or something like that. Like I pitched this show. I went to Netflix to pitch this show on the same day they canceled the NBA season, like at the very start of this pandemic. So I was like sitting in there waiting. I was at Netflix and I'm like sitting in there and I'm all nervous and I got my laptop and I'm like, you're going to love this idea. And like, while I'm waiting for the executives to come in the room, the assistant came in the room and they're like, hey, everybody, I just wanted you to know, like they just canceled the NBA season. And I was like, I am not going to sell. Nobody's going to listen. Nobody's going to hear a word I say of this show. Like we're about to enter like hell. But you pitch it and you just try to, you have like cool visual images and things. And you're just trying to sell people on your vision of why you think something's cool, why a story is worth telling, why you think these characters are worth visiting, right? And where you think that the actual show will go, what you think it's supposed to accomplish. And a good pitch will have all those elements. That it will engage people on a very human level, in a world that they may feel like they want to know more about, or they think they know, but you got something different to tell them. Or characters that are just slightly, a little bit different that they haven't seen. I think there's a real appetite for that kind of storytelling right now, like seeing new worlds and seeing new characters and seeing underrepresented groups. It's one of the reasons why I think television is actually getting really good, is because we have there's so many more voices like this. And so it's a great opportunity, but you'll pitch it out and your pitch has to, and then they're going to have questions for you. And if you've done a good job, they'll say, hey, that's great. We want to buy we want you to buy your show. Now, maybe you already wrote the pilot and they already had something to read. They read your pilot, and now you're telling them a little bit about the world. Or maybe you don't have a pilot yet. You just have a pitch. They'll, like studios and networks will buy that too. And they'll say, okay, now you go and you write the pilot. So it happens both ways. Like in the show that I had already written the pilot. So I was like, here, read this. And then I'm going to take 15 minutes and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the world. And then and you get them interested and they're like, great. Then they're going to, they're going to have notes on the pilot, and you're going to go into what's called just the development process. And the development process generally involves you doing notes on the pilot, and things like that until they get it to be something that they want. There's never going to be a situation, I've never heard of it happening, but where you just go in and you're all, here's the pilot, here's the pitch. And they're like, fantastic. We start shooting in like 3 weeks. Like we're going to open you up. You know what I mean? They have things that they want to do. And you know what I mean? It goes, you'll get notes and you'll have to execute on those notes. And that's part of what they do too. And again, it's like your decision, how you want to, like, how much you want to stray from the vision that you originally had. How much are you willing to do? Because I mean, I'm not lying around. This is so crazy. Like I went in with a show that was like super grounded crime drama, and they're like, we love it. That's fantastic. And they like gave me money for it. And I was like, well, that's cool. And then I came back the next time and they're all, now, when we went into the notes process, I still can't believe this happened. They wanted to put a supernatural element. They wanted to make it about vampires. Like, you know what I mean? I had never heard of such a thing in my life. I was just like, what about this show screams vampires to you people? But they said it, and I like walked out of that room, and I was just like, I got into my car and I like got on the 101, and I was like, that was the craziest shit I've ever heard in my life, dude. They want it to be about vampires. And so, you know what I mean? So clearly I wasn't going to make my show about vampires. So we didn't have any more meetings, you know what I mean? Or you could decide, you're like, look at vampires, you know what I mean? Let's like, if that's what you want, you're going to pay me money. It's like kind of a choose your own adventure situation. So you can decide to do what you want to do in that moment. But I think the most important thing to remember is that you're not a totally autonomous creative entity. You're asking people for a bunch of money, essentially. You know what I mean? Like you don't have the millions of dollars it's going to take to put your show on TV. Somebody else has that money. So they are going to have a say in what they want it to be. And you can get pissed about it. You get upset and, talk about how dumb executives are. They are kind of dumb, but like they're way worse than actors. But in reality, they're the people with the money. They're the people who are going to give you that, you know what I mean? Who are going to like allow you to create that vision or not. You know what I mean? Like it or not, like that's what's so funny about Hollywood is just kind of like, you hear so much stuff about like liberal Hollywood. I'm like, dude, these people are like the rawest capitalists I've ever encountered. It's like the most, you know what I mean? Like I've never in my life like seen like more like cowboy raw capitalism in my life than in Hollywood. I was like, you're way off base if you think this is some like crazy like liberal fantasy. Like these people are gonna make some money, and so you kind of like are like in that world where the money kind of rules it. And so yeah, that's just kind of like the reality of that process. But as you go in and pitch, what I think you should remember as budding filmmakers and as people with really unique stories and really interesting backgrounds and backgrounds that maybe people aren't as familiar with your specific world is that in and of itself has value, right? Like don't compromise your creative vision too much. The reason that you're in that room and the reason people are hearing your pitch and the reason people are buying that pitch is because you have a voice. Like you have something to say. So as you think about what you want to create and what you want to say, don't be afraid to like make it personal. And don't be afraid to like to stick to and be true to your vision of what you think you want to say, because there are going to be plenty of people along the way that tell you that try to pull you away from your creative vision. And I would encourage you to trust your voice and to trust yourself and to realize that the story you are telling, if it's personal and it resonates with you, will resonate with other people too. That it really will. And so, you know, whatever it is that you think is cool and emotional about the story that you want to tell, other people will think it's cool and emotional too. And if you let people mess with it too much, you'll end up with something that you never wanted to make in the first place. And and you won't recognize it, and you'll have lost your passion for it, and you will not enjoy it. And the whole time you'll be thinking about like what could have been, and that is not what you want to think. Don't be afraid to fight. And here's the thing, they expect you to like fight with them a little bit. You know what I mean? They expect you, like they'd be, I think most executives are pretty bummed if you're just like, okay, you know what I mean? They want you to be like, nah, I ain't doing that. You know what I mean? That's a no. Or like, that's a cool idea, but that sucks. I'm not doing that. You know what I mean? Like, own it as a creative professional. You know what I mean? Like too many people have just been told that like their story doesn't matter, or their story is not resonant, or not enough people care. I feel like that's self-defeating kind of bullshit. I think you guys should tell the stories that you want to tell. You know what I mean? About your life and your experiences, or something that is something that you're passionate about, something that you think speaks to the universal nature of our human experience. Will always sell, right? It doesn't matter. I mean, people get happy, they get sad, they face obstacles, they face challenges, they deal with things in the world. We all do. We're all human beings. And those will always be resonant stories that somehow reveal the human condition, regardless of the world that you set it in, or the or who your character is. I mean, part of the fun of like going, you know, I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she was like, oh, you know what I mean? We were talking about shows that we liked, and she was talking about Issa Rae's show. And I was like, oh, I love that show. It's a freaking great show. And they're like, really? You love that show? Like, and you know what I mean? They're like, you're a middle class, like freaking middle-aged white straight dude. Like, you know, you like, and I was like, I know. I don't get to hang out with a lot of young single Black women. So it's fascinating to me, the cool world that I get to enter in there. You know what I mean? Like, I don't get to hang out with like young single urban people, like community. My wife would never let me go hang out in clubs. So I love seeing shows like that. I love seeing things like, dude, there's no niche. Like, don't you guys like being exposed to worlds that you don't know anything about? Of course we do. We're all curious, wonderful people. Like, we love seeing, you know, the world is a beautiful palette of awesomeness, and we should be seeing creative visions from all of it. You know what I mean? And so if you have something that you think is cool, fuck, do that. You know what I mean? Do that thing for sure. Okay. So as far as what have I not covered? Any questions at this point? We're only an hour in.
There's a question in the chat, but I'm wondering, Bonnie, if you want to say your question out loud, or if you want me to read it. Either way is fine with me. I just don't want to slaughter the Hawaiian words. I can do it. So
yeah, how's it going,
Bonnie says, aloha, mahalo for sharing your time. Oh, are you there?
Yeah, aloha. So mahalo for sharing your time with your upcoming production in Hawaii, currently titled Kainui Road. You mentioned you are conscientious about the production team during the writing process. So are you thinking about being sensitive to representing Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiian people and the indigenous host culture as well inside your writing process? And do you plan to include local Hawaii and or Hawaiian writers in your writing room for this show if it goes forward, because you're doing the pilot, correct?
Yeah.
And many of us in Hawaii are really interested right now in the show because, you know, we've heard the buzzword about it being, you know, in the North Shore and so forth. So I just was wondering about that. But
yes. Oh yeah, of course. And thank you for the question. Yeah, my goal is to be the only Hali guy in the writer's room. That is like my overarching goal, and something that I'm frankly going to stick to. And I've spent a lot of time like trying, you know, like locating writers that are Hawaiian, you know what I mean, about Kanaka Maoli writers, and not just writers who like me grew up in Hawaii, but like Hawaiian writers. I have the first four, the main four people, the top four people on my call sheet are all Hawaiian characters. So from the casting to the crew to the writing, my goal with this production, and I am supported in this, fortunately, by my production partners, is to have it be local, and to have it be, and not just local, because local is a strangely contested term, I think, but to have it be Hawaiian. So I have my kind of like network of Kanaka Maoli writers that I am working with, especially right now, saying like, hey, I want to make sure your samples are ready, make sure that, you know what I mean, because I submit writers that I want to hire, they go through the studio and the network process, they go through all the you know what I mean, they have to get approved and everything. And so a lot of my work right now is making sure that those writers that I have identified, if I get lucky enough to get a green light for the writer's room, that those folks have writing samples and that they are on the radar, that they can get approved up through the chain of studio and network. So I can put together a writer's room that, you know what I mean, that reflects Hawaii. It's really important to me. You know, the whole point of me writing the show is really, I you know, you see a lot of shows that are set in Hawaii, but I don't see a lot of shows that are about Hawaii. And so my goal was to have a show that is about Hawaii, and about Hawaii's people, and that reflects some of just the challenges that people have in Hawaii, that as a colonial space. I think Hawaii has a unique opportunity to change the discussion about a lot of things. I think we have a very different discussion about race in Hawaii, for instance. I think that we have too long ignored colonialism, you know, in our discussions about like the American project. Hawaii, you cannot ignore it in Hawaii. You know, you cannot discount Hawaii as a colonial space. And so the stories that I tell are stories that I think people, hopefully in Kainui Road, which it probably will not end up being that name, but it's the story of the people who actually live in Hawaii instead of the people who visit Hawaii, and so I'm working really hard to create a production team and a writers team that can tell those stories in a way that is pono for, you know, for the place where we live. I mean, you know, a lot of those conversations involve me putting my foot down on a lot of things, because saying like, look, I live here, and when the cameras are all over and the trucks are all loaded up, and if this show goes and it's over, I still am going to live here. So we have to do it a certain way. And so that's been my goal for the whole process. I hope that answers your question. Bonnie, are you still there?
Yeah, mahalo. That was awesome. Mahalo nui for that, because it's a really thoughtful, conscientious answer. So I know we appreciate it. You know, many of us that are in the film industry here, and exactly what you said, there's often a lack of representation, and you know, it starts, I think, obviously with the writing and the writer's room, and then that pitching to the executive. So it's awesome to hear that you have that support from the producers as well. So
we
right
do.
on.
We're deep into casting on it. You know what I mean? The casting, because we don't have a series pickup now, right? It's just a pilot. It's like, you know, we started so early on the casting of it, because my whole thing was, it's kind of like, look, you're gonna send me a bunch of actors, and I that's awesome, but we want this to be a discovery process. You know what I mean? Having, you know, grown up here and raising my kids here, and realizing like how deep the pool of talent in Hawaii is. Like, we have kids here who grow up in a very like kind of just an awesome performative sort of environment. You know, they're involved in halal, and they're involved in like Mayday, and they're involved in all these things in performing, and just such a deep talent pool. So part of our casting process is to move to not only the theater groups, but going to just like high schools, like my alma mater, Kahuku High School, where I went to high school, and you know, the YNIC writers, and going to these Hawaiian communities where we're just like finding people and saying, read for this part. And maybe you're not a polished actor, but we can help with that. You know what I mean? We can get you into some acting classes. We can like have actors on set. Like we can like we don't have to like always lean on established sorts of people who we've seen a million times. We can have local kids and local people play these local characters in a way that is, in my opinion, like more convincing and better. And then once we've done that, to say, look how successful we were doing that. Let's do the same thing with our writer's room. And I think that's something, as many of you go on to create your own shows and do this kind of thing, that that it's worth having those discussions. It's worth standing up for those kinds of things, because they're going to make your show and your production a lot better. But yeah, hopefully, like hopefully the show will go and you'll see which battles I've won, and you'll probably see a couple I've lost, but I'm going to do my best. Okay, any other questions before we go on? Okay, is there anything that I have not covered that you would wish to hear more about? Anything as far as like the role of other creative partners, like directors, or I'm not a director myself, but I can speak to it, having worked with some others. Robert, did you have anything you wanted me to cover?
Well, I'm curious about the steps. Like we talked about the pitch, you talked about writing the pilot, and now you're casting the pilot, you're getting ready to shoot. So do you want to talk a little bit about the writer's involvement in pre-production? And how, you talked about filling out your writer's room at this point. What else are you doing in preparation with the possibility of a green light to series?
So that's a great question. So what we do generally, as if you are the person who sells the show, you will either, if you have enough experience, you will become the showrunner, the executive producer of the show, or you will be paired with someone who will help you through that process. Because what a showrunner essentially is, it's a very, very unique and incredible job that you are asked to have such a varied skill set. And I'm pretty convinced that it's almost impossible to have the actual skill set that they want you to have to do this job successfully, because you're used to all the way up, you know, as you come up as a writer, you're used to being like, it's about what's on the page. It's about your creativity. Now, all of a sudden you're a manager. Like you are now in charge of hiring people, managing people, firing people. You have budgets, you have all kinds of stuff that you never really like thought about before. So as you get ready to shoot a pilot, you have to put together an entire production team, which includes, do you know what I mean? Now you'll usually be assigned a director, right? Or you're interview directors, but the studio or the network will have somebody that they're interested in directing the pilot. They are your essentially your most important creative partner, because they're going to have such an incredible amount of power over the look and feel of the show that you've written. So you have to you'll get a director. You have to hire a director of photography. You have to hire a stunt coordinator and a production designer and a transportation coordinator and a prop master and all of these department heads. And sometimes they bring people with them. In Hawaii, we're in a very unique situation in Hawaii, because we've never had this much production in Hawaii before. There's there's gonna be in the fall 4 major network shows shooting in Hawaii. We just never had it here before, right? So where there has been kind of like 2 full production crews at any time in Hawaii that have been able to stay busy between like movies and TV. Now it's like, there's a lot. And so, ideally, if what we want is to keep those jobs local. You want local people to have those jobs. You know what I mean? And so getting a pool of people who can work on the production, identifying those people, getting them hired, preparing budgets, renting from like the most banal, like renting a production office. Like I got to find a production office and like a place to put our offices. And then I got to you got to fill the offices with things like desks and computers. Like I don't know how to do any of that shit. So it's like being a full on like manager is the next part of that. So as you prepare to go to your pilot, you'll get a date that you'll start prep, and then a day that you'll start principal photography. And on the day that you start prep, you have to have everybody hired so they can actually begin preparing to shoot. And you have to have a place for them all to do it. and you are working with people from, you know, the city and county of Honolulu, in my sense, in the state of Hawaii, in my sense, for, you know, from everything towards filming permits, locations permits, to tax credits. And you're just like, I mean, it's running a business. And in reality, when you think of it in a certain way, it's like you're running a business with up to like 150 maybe employees with a budget of like, I don't know, 75 million bucks. That's a decent sized company. You become the CEO of like a decent sized company. And, you know, it's hard. It's a lot. At the same time, you are responsible for the creative vision and the execution of that creative vision of the show, which means you're the last person to touch all the scripts before they go to production, which means you're going to write it, which means you're going to make sure that the director's catching everything, which means you're going to hire the directors when it goes to series. So all of these things come down to kind of like, you've been involved for a certain amount of time in the writing of it, in the creative part, and now you're involved in the practical production part, and you have a lot of people like relying on you. So it is, you know, incredibly important to hire people whose vision you trust, who are professionals. You get people like Robert Scott, who's going to be a unit production manager, who's going to, you know, watch those budgets for you and make sure that they're like helping you do things, and they're going to be great partners. I mean, and what you learn is like everyone's vital. Like there's no, you know, everybody is just like a vital piece of your production puzzle, and you have to treat them like that. You know what I mean? Because without it, it just doesn't work. You know what I mean? And you have to treat it as like it's a team sport. You know what I mean? And you can't just get caught up in like, this is my show and my vision, and we're gonna do. It is a team that brings a show to life and brings a production together. And if you treat it like that, I think, in my opinion, that's what makes a show successful, that all of those things end up on the screen. You know what I mean? They end up in your actors' performances, and they end up in everything else. And they end up in the feeling that people have when they go to work in the morning. Are they excited about their job? Do they feel valued? Do you know what I mean? If you go on to set as a writer and a prop master comes up to you and he goes, this gun or this gun? And you go, I don't know, whatever. What do you think that communicates to your prop master? It essentially says, I don't give a shit. Your job's not important to me. Do you know what I mean? But their job is important. They're asking you a question. Which gun? Look at it. Well, I like that one, or I like that. Like, why did you bring me these two? Well, this one is kind of what I think the cops would use, and I did the research. And this one, do you know what I mean? Your production manager, she thought about that. Your prop master thought deeply. I'm going to bring my showrunner these two guns, and I want him to make a decision. Don't be flippant about their craft. You know what I mean? Listen to them. Hey, your costume designer, what should our lead be wearing? I had this outfit or this outfit. You know what I mean? You ask a question, think about it. You know, those details that go into your show are extremely important. And the people who are making those decisions and bringing you those options are thoughtful, competent professionals who need to, you need to value their contribution to the show, and you need to understand why what they do is important. And that is something that you have to learn as you go through into it. And I'm still learning. I'm not, telling you this because I'm really good at everything. I'm just trying to figure all this out and learn it. But I think that's the biggest change is after you sell the pitch, and after they tell you, okay, we're going to do it, we're going to shoot the pilot, moving into the actual production side of it, where there are people to be hired, there is a show to happen, and there are decisions to be made, and that you have to have answers for those questions. You know what I mean? It's like, I've heard of the advice given to directors, right? When you walk on a set and somebody comes up and they ask you, hey, what about this plant? Where does it go? Even if you don't know the answer to that question, you say it goes right there. Set it right there. Awesome. You can change it later. But if you're like, I don't know. You're the director. Make the decision. You know what I mean? If an actor comes up to you as a writer and goes, why would I say this right now? Have an answer. Know your script enough to be like, you say this because you are trying to get your scene partner, you're trying to get something from this person. And if you don't say this, then they're going to do, okay, great. You know what I mean? If you are ready and you act competent and you take it seriously and work hard, it'll come out and it'll show. I ain't gonna lie, man, it's a lot of work. It's a hard job. It's definitely like, it's a lot of work, making a television show. It's long hours, and it can be frustrating, it can be grueling, and there's a lot of personalities, and it is just hard work. There's no way around that. And frankly, it's the hardest work I've ever done in my life. And I've worked on roofing crews through summers. And so it's pretty hard. It's at the end of the day, you're pretty exhausted. So, but it's also awesome and, creative and a lot of fun to do too. So I think that the biggest, once you sell your pilot and it gets greenlit and you have a production partner, then you get into the real work of setting up what the show is going to be. And then maybe, so for instance, after I get my pilot shot, if it looks good, maybe they'll set up a writer's room. And setting up the writer's room means you got to hire your writers. You got to read all the scripts, and you got to meet everybody, and you got to get in there. And then when the scripts start coming in, you have to, you'll get in there and you'll start breaking story. And you'll start creating out the actual what's going to happen in the first season of your show, understanding what's going to happen in the series of your show. So, do you guys mind if I talk a little bit about kind of creating going through the creating a story, beating out a season of a show? Is that cool to talk about?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. And we've got a number of writers on this call right now who I'm sure would be really interested. They're in the middle of writing their pilots.
Oh, awesome. So it's really important when you go to break a season, because what'll happen is you'll start your writer's room, and then some time, maybe 3 weeks or a month after you start your writer's room, you will have to go to the studio and the network, and you'll have to pitch out the season to them. So you'll have to go tell them, okay, here's what's going to happen in the season. And so what you're kind of looking for, and so you'll have to have the way that I approach it, or the way I've seen it approached, is you start on your first day with your writers and you just go by character, right? You just go by character. Say you have 4 main characters on a show, and you take it character by character, and you talk about where do they start? If it's the beginning of a show, like you've just done the pilot, you're pretty clear about where they start. I often think of the pilot as like act 1 of a movie, right? Like a lot of times you'll see a pilot and kind of the inciting incident that, you know what I mean? You leave the pilot, what you always want when you leave a pilot is like, okay, what happens next? What happens next? You know what I mean? That you want your audience to think that, you want everybody to think like, I can't wait to see episode 2. So in a way, it's kind of like act 1 of a movie, right? And then you kind of get in and you move forward with your story from there. So you know what's going to happen, and you start just taking it character by character and say, by the end of season 1, I want this character to be in this place. By the end of season 1, I want character 2 to be in this place. By the end of season 3, I want character. You start looking for links between characters. I often think of it. I think it's very helpful to think of character relationships in terms of triangles, building triangles of characters, right? Because there's a lot of dramatic potential in building those kind of character triangles. And then once you've kind of got an idea of what, say you're doing a 10 or a 13 episode show, you might go up on your board and have cards for 1 through 13 and have a line for each character and say so somewhere around episode 3, we want this to happen to the character, right? And then somewhere around episode 5, in the midpoint of the season, we want this to happen to the character. And then somewhere in the back half of the season, there's the other kind of major dramatic point that we want to happen. And you could have a plot point that you want to happen. You're like, okay, in the end of this season, this character is going to die, or this, you know what I mean? Or they're going to be dealing with this sort of obstacle. So you know that happens in episode 11 of a 13 episode season because you're building up to your finale. So how does each character move through that event? How does it change them? And so you're thinking about it in those terms a lot. I feel like breaking story by character is the most important way to do it. I just feel that people do it other ways. That's the way I do it. I approach through character. I think it's the most compelling thing. I mean, I think approaching story through character is the most compelling way to do story, because you're selling, you know what I mean? You want your audience to be invested in your characters. And so I break story through character. So, and I just will look at and kind of say, like, this is what I want to happen to this character over the season. These are the other characters who are going to interact in these ways. And you just go character by character and build it. Pretty soon, what you'll notice is you have a grid, right? You have episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way to 13. And then you have character 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, A, B, C, and D. And then you say, this is going to happen. And then all of a sudden you're starting to see, like, oh, wait, so in episode 2, these are the things that need to happen. In episode 3, these are the things that need to happen, right? And so you now have a story for your episode, right? So if in episode 4, your main character has to go to jail, and so your story that you're going to tell in episode 4 is that your character is caught in, you know, goes to trial and ends up, you know, going to jail at the end of the episode. That's a story, right? You have a beginning and a middle and an end. So you know what you need to do in that episode for that character. You need to tell that story. So what you're starting to do is build the structure in the structure into the whole arc of the whole thing, right? I feel like that's the best way to do it is to break from character. And I would encourage you to do the same, because good things, characters are the most memorable things, I think, in a show. I mean, that's what really usually draws people in. Like, worlds are cool, but characters are better and more compelling, because you're actually into like a human story. I just saw that question came through, so I'm going to read it and answer it, if that's cool. And this is from Nancy. If you have an idea and a script but are not a showrunner, how do you get a showrunner? Or are there other elements that would help get the project off the ground? Is finding an agent useful? Yes, finding an agent is useful. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to navigate. You know, the way that it's set up is that your representatives kind of like find opportunities for you, right? So it's almost impossible to get a glimpse behind the curtain into, say, a network or a studio. Like, you or me, or like, I don't know what Netflix wants to do. I don't know what their executives are saying in their executive meetings, and they're like, we need a really good, you know what I mean, drama, or we need another comedy show. They're looking for things to fill out their slate. You might not know that. The job of an agent is to know that, and to try and pair you, and to try and help you sell what people are looking for, right? You got to have a buyer and a seller, right? And the buyer has to, they have a pretty good idea of what they want to buy. So if you have an idea and a script, the best way to get those in front of a studio or a network or your potential buyers is through an agent. And so agent first, honestly, I would find I think is step one, is to find an agent, because without one, it becomes very difficult. If you, still there are many writers that get staffed without representation. What I usually see is those folks are like showrunners assistants, right? They get a job as a showrunner's assistant, and they have a great script, and their showrunner sees it and says, hey, why don't I send this script to my agent? And we'll see what they think. And then your agent, the agent reads the script and goes, gosh, I really want to represent this person. I think they have a unique voice. I think they have a unique story. And so I will encourage you all. Here's how, there's like a little bit of a philosophy to getting an agent, right? There's like, you got to think like an agent, which is a very uncomfortable thing. They're a very particular kind of people. You don't want to be one. They're weird, like, I don't know. I'm not going to talk shit about agents, but like, it's a very like particular, like kind of like salesy person that like wants to become an agent, because their job is like to represent you and be like, I was very particular about like my agent, because I was like, I don't want my agent to be some kind of like jerk who's like really pushy and lame, because like, that's not my personality. And you don't want somebody, literally they're your rep, they're your representative, which means they are representing to you. So if you are turned off by like pushy, aggressive people. Do you want your agent to be like a pushy, aggressive person? Like probably not, because they're representing you. But they have to be a little bit pushy and aggressive because their job is to sell you and get you in the door and do stuff like that. So what an agent is looking for, they're going to read your script. And they're either going to resonate with the material or not. They're going to respond initially to the writing. You're only going to get a meeting after they've read your script. Nobody's going to meet you without a script. I mean, so like focus on the writing, always on the writing, always be writing, always be coming up with ideas, always be trying to like get samples out there. Because the way that they're going to meet you first is through your script. They're not going to see your face or see, you know, your personality necessarily. They're going to read your script. Then you're going to get a meeting, you're going to go in the room and they're going to be like, now they're trying to feel out your personality. And they're sitting across from you and they're going like, if I send this person into a meeting with the executives at Studio A, B, or C, is this person going to do well in the meeting? Is this person going to be someone that I can, do they have a story, right? Your agent has to sell you. So you need to sell your agent. You need to let them know like why anybody should be listening to you. What is it that's unique and interesting about you? Now, this is very, very uncomfortable. If you're anything like me, like you're in the weird position of being like, this is why I'm awesome, which is so lame. You know what I mean? It's just the lamest thing ever. Like, you don't want to be like, do that kind of stuff, but you kind of like have to engage in that a little bit of like, this is why you want to talk to me. And like, what makes me so interesting and cool. It's the most uncomfortable thing in the world, but you kind of have to do it because that's what they're looking for. They're like, oh, you're going to go in, you're going to meet the executive. They're going to, and it's the same thing. The executive's not going to meet you until they read your script too. They want to, the agent sends your script first. The executive goes, oh, I like this. I'm interested to meet this person. And then they meet you. And they're like, maybe I'll staff this person on a show, or maybe I will, I'm interested in developing this script, something like that. So unfortunately, to answer Nancy's question, yeah, the agent is not only useful, it's like kind of key in a lot of ways. It's kind of key. I think it would be great if the agents weren't such effective gatekeepers, but you know what I mean? They kind of are. So, but the good news is agents are incentivized to find the next new shiny object, like the next new cool thing. So if you write a good script, there's never been a better market for good scripts, honestly. It just hasn't. You know what I mean? Like, this is the time. Like, there are 400 and something scripted television shows. Like, there's just never been a better time. You know what I mean? To like, they want content. Like, there is a machine that needs to be fed right now. And you should absolutely be the ones to be feeding it, because that the content, they need the content. So get your script out there and do it. Where do you find it? I just got I'm just gonna take these in order. How far would I say I was in the development or story before you pitch the idea story? I always write scripts on spec. I personally don't like to go in with just an idea, because it's way easier for them to like them. I'm like, I'm othering these poor people. They're just executives. They're human beings like the rest of us. They just don't present as such. No, I'm just kidding. But I like to go in with a script. To be honest, I like to go in with spec scripts and just be like, this is the script. This is the world. Now you see what I've done. Because if you go in with just an idea, like, trust me, they're going to have way more. They're going to want way more creative input than you're going to want to give them. I guarantee it. So if you can get away with writing a spec script and getting somebody interested in that, better, I think. But you know, whatever, you sell whatever you can and stick to your guns. But I just feel like going in with a spec script, I mean, again, some places don't like it. They want to be very involved in the development process. They want to be very involved in the ideas of it all. But I don't want them to be that involved personally. So I would rather just go in with a spec script and be like, this is the thing. Like, I'm welcome to hear, I want to hear some of your notes, but like, I don't, these are the characters, this is the world. And like, you want a script that's like so good and cool. They're like, I don't want to change much. This is good. You know what I mean? That's your goal. Like, what you're shooting for is like, every time you write something, whether it's season 5, episode 4 of Animal Kingdom, or whether it's like your pilot script, your goal is no notes, no notes, no notes. I want it to be perfect. If it's never perfect, you'll never not get notes. In my entire life, I've never not gotten notes. Like every script that I've turned in, I'm like, this is the one, man. This is perfect. You can't mess with this thing. It's beautiful. I get notes. You know what I mean? So, but if you strive for like, I want to make it good, my goal is always going to be no notes till the day I die, then at least you've put forth your best effort in the script, like you've put something out there that you're like, no, I can defend this. I'm proud of it. Look, man, if you mail it in, and you write something and you're like, you know what I mean? I wrote it this weekend and it's like draft 3 or whatever, like it's a lot harder to defend the thing when people start picking it apart. Because you know what you did, you mailed it in, you freaking, you know what I mean, did it in hour 23. So, but if you really like thought about every little scene and put it apart and you're like, hey man, like it's pretty tight. There's no, I don't think I should be getting any notes on this. That you're in, I think, a better position to do it. So to answer the question of how far in developing a story, like far, like I know what I want to do already. When it's time for me to go in and pitch, or like when I send something to my agent, I'm like, here's my new thing. It's pretty far along. And what you should be doing is like finding a network of other writers that you can share your material with. You know what I mean? If the only person reading your stuff is your agent, you're going to get a bunch of stupid notes because they're not writers. And all they know is they're like, Netflix is looking for this. Like, so this is a really cool idea, Matt, but do you want to make it this instead? No, you don't want to do that. You know what I mean? You want to like go to your writer friends and have them give you notes because they're actual writers. They know what the hell they're talking about. You know what I mean? You don't want to get notes on your writing from people who can't even write. That's no good. You know what I mean? Those are the worst kind of notes to get because you don't trust them. But if you have friends who write and struggle through the process of like looking at the blank page, the most terrifying thing on planet Earth, the blank piece of paper, or like a screen with no words on it. If you know people who go through that struggle, like you're gonna get better notes from them. So develop your community of writers and people that you know and you trust and you like their taste and you like their sensibilities, and like share your work with them, and they should share their work with you. And you know what I mean? And work through that. So by the time you send it off to an agent or a potential agent, you know it's pretty good, or at least you feel confident about it. You know what I mean? You feel confident enough about it to be like, okay, this is something that I feel pretty proud of.
Once you've created that perfect script that you think this is the one, you're not going to get any notes, and then you do receive notes, is there any sort of advice that you might be able to give to budding writers who how best to let go of that idea that this was the way it was supposed to be, and to be able to absorb and incorporate some of these new ideas and new directions, and how to see the script in a new light?
Yeah, it's hard, man. You get so precious about it. You're just like, you're telling me my baby's ugly? That's literally like the whole, it's like personal. It's just like one of the only businesses where you're just kind of like, it hurts so much to get notes on something you work so hard on. Like, it's painful because essentially it feels so personal. You're like, I think this is so good and so cool. And they're like, I don't. You're like, oh, it's like the worst thing ever. It's literally like telling you your baby's ugly. And then you have to go through that very painful thing of looking at your baby and being like, it is maybe a little ugly. Like, this baby could be a little more attractive. So you just have to realize that, like, look, man, and sometimes what happens is there's something that like, you're so in it, like you're so in the story and everything, that somebody who comes to it totally fresh will just have insights that you didn't think of. So you're like, oh, how did you not get that? And they're like, I didn't. And if somebody tells you like, I didn't get it, then you should probably think about why they didn't get it, especially if it's a really important thing for them to get. You have to be humble enough to realize that you're just like, you know what I mean? I'm not freaking Shakespeare, man. You know what I mean? I ain't Aaron Sorkin. You didn't get it. And if you didn't get it, that's my fault. Like that means my writing wasn't clear enough or good enough or whatever. And so you just have to like kind of eat it. You know what I mean? And like, try not to take it too personally, or like, you know what I mean? Just try not to like, go home, play with your dog, stay out of the bars, and just recognize that it's like, Like you just have to deal with it. You know what I mean? That you're kind of like, I thought it was perfect and it's not. It's like the most painful part of the whole thing, like getting notes and sometimes notes are just like, there's certain notes where you're like, ah, it's bullshit. I don't have to listen to that. Like, and then there's certain notes where you're like, oh yeah, like I overlooked that. You know what I mean? Or I wasn't nearly as clear about that thing as I could have been. And you just have to be humble about it and like take the note. You just have to. Nobody's a perfect writer. You know what I mean? Like nobody's a perfect writer. And as hard as you worked on it, it's not perfect. And even though I've taken scripts through, I mean, I've literally been on the 20th draft of scripts as it's gone through like rounds and rounds and rounds of notes. And then you're like, oh, I got to go through it one more time before I send it to the studio and the network. And you read through it and you're like, oh, and you fix something. You know what I mean? It's just like, it happens. So it's just like, goes back to the old adage, right? Like writing is rewriting. And it's just rewriting it again and again and again. And I would say if you're on draft number 4, like you're just getting started. And that's just the reality of it. It ain't fun, but you know, there it is. So take the notes, unless they're like egregiously bad and you're like, oh, you're just not getting it. But if I explain it to you, because sometimes you'll be like, okay, I don't really agree with this note. Can we talk about this? And then you explain it to them and they're like, oh, okay, cool. You know what I mean? So have the conversation first before you rewrite act 4. You know what I mean? Just like, because sometimes you can just have a conversation and avoid it, but sometimes they're just like, no, I still don't get it, or it still doesn't ring true to me or whatever. And it'll be a very personal calibration of do I take this note? Do I not take this note? Do I trust this perspective, or do I not trust this perspective? Where do you find an agent? Yeah, roaming the street, you know, the Mercedes dealership. I think you know that there's the big agencies, right? There's like CAA and WME and UTA and kind of the big, huge agencies. I'm with a smaller like boutique television agency who I like very much. I feel like I'm not lost among a bunch of people. They've been very good to me. They're great people. You can get a list of agencies from the Writers Guild, and you don't have to be a Writers Guild member to do it. You know what I mean? You can just call up the Writers Guild and say, like, I'm an aspiring writer and I want a list of agencies because I want to submit my original material because I'm the next big thing that you never heard of. And they'll go, great. And you can submit to those agencies. And that's where you can do it. Or you can, you know what I mean, build networks of writers if you are within a creative community, or just like work your networks as much as you can, like meet writers, where you can, like friends of friends, like literally however you can get your work in front of people is fair game. But yeah, the agencies are always taking submissions because they're incentivized to discover talent. It pays their bills. And so that would be the way that I would go about it, is just find out who they are and submit your stuff. I mean, always better if you have a personal contact, but if you don't give up, just do it, try it. It could be a script that just grabs somebody and they're like, yeah, I want to talk to you. Protective measures for my content. Yeah, you can register your script with the Writers Guild, and they provide that service. In my opinion and in my experience, it doesn't stop anybody from ripping you off and stealing everything. I had a pitch that I gave to Disney, that I pitched to Disney, and they just straight up told me no. And it came out, and it's coming out as a movie with a different writer. And I mean, all you can really say is like, well, at least it was a pretty good idea. You know what I mean? I don't know that I have any like recourse to those people besides being like, those sons of bitches, you know, make yourself feel better. You know what I mean? You can throw a rock at something or whatever, but like, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, but there, and that's why the other thing that's very good to do is just like write something that you think you're the only person who can write. You know what I mean? Something that's very like specific to you. Make yourself invaluable by mining your own perspective and finding that thing that you do best, you know, over everybody else. And again, realizing that like no idea is like truly completely original either, right? Like we're all like kind of building on ideas that other people have had. So if you write a hospital drama and then a hospital drama comes out from the same network, you can't necessarily just be like, unbelievable, horrifying, they stole my idea. There's been a bunch of hospital dramas. You know, they might have taken something unique from yours, but it's just, unfortunately, it's like, yeah, I had Glenn Mazzara, who is a really good showrunner, and you know, he's been on a ton of great shows, and he's run a ton of great shows. He's an incredible writer. He's a great mentor. He's a really great guy. Told me, he goes, newsflash, this is Hollywood. There are assholes. And I was like, oh, okay. I get it. I was like expecting everybody to be cool. And he's like, So anyway, you do your best to like try and keep your original idea, but you can register your script with the WGA. All that really prevents happening is literally your script being completely ripped and you know, a couple of names being changed and being resubmitted. You know, it'll prevent that, right? But as far as other forms of semi-egregious piracy, yeah, unfortunately, it's just kind of like happens, you know. It's a bummer, but it's happened to everybody. So you can take some solace in that. They're not just stealing from you.
Matt, are you do you know of any specific like apprenticeship programs or writer fellowship programs that the studios have, or anything that might help folks get their feet in the door, or get their faces up front?
Yes, I think that two of the best programs for that are specifically for first-time writers of color and diverse writers are the Warner Brothers program, and CBS also has a really great program. Those programs are managed by the studios and also run through the Writers Guild. And you can find more information on those programs at the Writers Guild website. But Warner Brothers has a great program that has placed a lot of people. And what they'll essentially do is, what's great about the Warner Brothers program is they essentially pay your salary. So a showrunner's incentivized to hire, you know what I mean, a young, inexperienced writer of color, because they don't have to pay that person's salary. Warner Brothers pays that salary. You know what I mean? So it's like, great, we'll hire you. You don't cost me any money. Again, the rawest, most crazy capitalism I've ever encountered. It's like all about money, but it's a good program, right? You know, the shows are incentivized to buy that because you're like a free, warm body that you're able to go and then prove yourself on that show. It's a great program, really great program. And that's the one that I am the most familiar with, that I've seen people come up with, and I think is quite successful. And the formal name of it right now escapes me, but it's
is it the television workshop?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just put it in the chat. I think that's the link.
That's it. It's a great program. I can't, you know what I mean? Great writers have come up through that program. Great writers have come up through that program. You know what I mean? And that's like, you know, it's only a boon for Warner Brothers, because it allows them to like find great people. You know what I mean? Who otherwise they might not have had a chance, because every time somebody hires you on their show as a brand new writer who's never proved themselves in a staff, they're taking a huge risk on you. You know what I mean? They're taking a huge risk on you. And so it removes that risk from the showrunner, and allows people to have an opportunity that they would not normally have.
And like you say, we're going through this golden age of television where the demand for content has never been at this level before. So it's really the best time to be breaking in. You know, we've on Animal Kingdom, John Wells, being the showrunner, has gone to great lengths to help bring people up who come from different walks of life, and we've really been blessed by that, and also been blessed by his management style of not just the business side of it, but the human side of it, and creating a positive, like a family environment where people feel welcome and they're respected, and you feel like you're happy to be going to work. Can you speak, Matt, to the sort of we talked a little bit about the technical aspects of it. What about the personal aspects? What sort of like personal behaviors or habits that might help someone get in the door and stay in the job if they're lucky enough to get it?
I think that I think it comes down to 4 words, you know what I mean? Which is work hard, be kind. Work hard, be kind. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is a job where a bunch of people work hard. You got to work hard to succeed. But you don't got to be a jerk. Be kind. Be nice to people. Don't lie. You just be honest, be kind, and work hard. And whether it works out or not, wouldn't you rather live your life that way and be that kind of person? It's just like the formula is simple. John embodies that formula. Do you know what I mean? He's a humanist at heart. He's a good person. He's a kind person. He treats people with respect and dignity. And there are plenty of people in this business who do not. Now that's changing. The kind of behavior that was tolerated 10 years ago is not nearly as tolerated as it is today. There have been some monsters in this business that are not even, and I'm not even talking about just like sexual harassment or things like that, which are horrible enough, but just toxic, mean-spirited, terrible behavior to other people. Don't do it. Just don't. It's competitive, but what do you win in the end? Do you know what I mean? Just work hard and be kind, and you'll be and respect people, and it goes a long way. Because whatever happens at the very end, what do you have? You have your name. You know what I mean? You have your reputation. And this is a business where your reputation precedes you. You know what I mean? You have to build a reputation for a good work environment. Now, somebody may say they weren't right for this show. You know what I mean? Matt wasn't right for this show. He didn't quite get the voice, but boy, did he work hard, and what a great person. I may not hire Matt back, but hey, maybe he'll be right for your show. You know what I mean? Maybe Matt's voice is right for this other show. And even though he didn't nail the scripts, his voice was a little off. Boy, really enjoyed working with that person. You know what I mean? Brought a lot, was nice, respectful, really worked hard. You know what I mean? What else do you want? You know what I mean? I feel like it's just a good kind of, that's it.
That's fantastic.
I don't know what else to say.
Any other questions, folks?
Any other questions? You guys have been awesome. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it.
You've been awesome. This has been amazing. Thank you, Robert, again, for bringing another amazing person to share with our young people who are aspiring to be writers and showrunners and directors and producers. Matt, your insights are so beautiful. Oh, it looks like Rosina has a question.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Rosina's in our docu-series program, so she's developing a documentary series.
Awesome.
Hey, yeah, I just want to say thank you. The past time has been like amazing because I've already gained so much like how-tos for walking into these spaces, which I think is all valuable for all of us. I was really curious though, like, you know, when you go in and you pitch something, typically a lot of the power lies in people that you're pitching to. So when you came in with the intention to make sure that the story about the people from Hawaii that you're talking about on that specific island, like how did you advocate to make sure that, you know, the cast and crew were all native to the community that you were trying to depict?
Can I give you guys like a general piece of advice that I think will help you out a ton in this business, in any negotiation, if everything can be a negotiation? It's that if you believe in something enough, you have to be willing to walk away if it's not going to happen. Do you know what I mean? If somebody's just going to like blaze over you and they're going to do things that you find so egregious and so detrimental to your vision, you have to be able to walk. You need to be willing to walk. Now, that may mean that you have to make certain decisions in your life. You know, you're going to start being a writer and you're going to get big paychecks and you're going to be like, damn, I never even seen this much money. I made this much money. And the temptation is going to be like to buy the big house and buy the big car and do all that shit. But you're putting yourself at the whim of other people at that moment. Do you know what I mean? If I had to add something to work hard, be kind, show respect, it's live simply. You know what I mean? And you don't need that much, and it gives you a freedom. It offers you a position and an ability and a freedom to say, like, you can't push me around like that because I don't need you. You know what I mean? And if I believe in this enough, I'm just not going to do what you want, you know, that egregious thing that you want me to do. You know what I mean? If they were to come to me right now and say, like, hey, Matt, Kainui Road sounds awesome, but your main Hawaiian character, we're going to have him be a white guy. I'd just be like, then I don't need we're not going to do that. Do you know what I mean? I don't need you that much. Now, if I had a $20,000 a month mortgage and I was driving a $750 lease car, like, I needed a little more. You know what I mean? So that's just like unsolicited life advice of, like, live simply, like, always be willing to just be like, yeah, fuck you, I'm out of here. I don't need to do what you say to do. And, like, you know, it's stupid kind of sounding, but, like, think about it. You know what I mean? Like, there's very few ways in this business that you can put yourself in the driver's seat. And one of them is to live simply enough to where you don't have to be at the whim of every other person's decision. It's like buying a used car. Like, you got to be willing to walk, and try to put yourself into a position where you can do that. It may sound weird or preachy. I hope it doesn't sound that way. I hope it doesn't come out that way. I don't mean it to be that way. But there are very few opportunities and ways for you to manage the power that you have, and that is one of them, and a very effective one at that.
Thank you.
So hopefully that helps. And thank you so much, Bonnie. Mahalo. I appreciate it. And Bonnie, if you're still on here and you're a writer, send me your script. Please do. I want to read it.
Yeah, my husband right now, he works in locations at Magnum PI, actually.
Oh, no way. Oh, right on.
Together. So he's Native Hawaiian. I'm
Oh.
not. So we do a collaboration together, but we just shot our short film, Emalama Pono Willie Boy. So it was great hearing what you said. There's definitely talent here that is just unreal. So, but thank you. I'd love it if you could read actually our script. We're pretty excited about it.
I'd love to read it.
Pick funding, and we were also part of the Native Sundance Short Lab back a few years ago. So, but thank you so much. This is awesome. And
thank you.
Good luck with everything with your upcoming pilot.
Thanks. Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
I'm in Haula. If you ever want to look me up, I'm real easy to find. You know where Haula is.
Okay, thank you. Mahalo.
See you guys.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was just great. It was really inspiring and informative. And, you know, we're really grateful to you for taking your time to be with us today. And I do think I'm going to invite you to some other things, because I think that we have some things that are happening that you might be interested in, just checking out new talent. I also want to thank Robert, of course. You know, everybody on Animal Kingdom has been so awesome. Thank you so much. And of course, to the California Film Commission, we're really grateful for this program. It really helps us a lot. It helps. I think you can see, you know, people are really responding to this. So thanks so much. And we did record it, so that means other people can watch it as well. So
Great.
thank you. Mahalo, right? Thank you.
And thanks, Don, and thanks so much, Matt. And please tune in next week, where we have Eric Avellino, one of our guest directors, who I think will have a very, very interesting and inspiring perspective to provide on directing. I think it's going to be a very nice session.
Oh yeah, it's going to be exciting. Great.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Yeah, good afternoon, good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Wow, thank you, Robert.